I have worked as a delivery driver for 3 years. My job is simple. I pick up packages from the warehouse and drop them off at people's homes. It's a decent job, but sometimes the night shifts can be unsettling, especially on quiet streets when there's no one around but you. It was a Thursday night when I got a call to deliver a package to a place I had never been before. The address was in an old part of town, far from my usual route. The area had a reputation for being run down, almost forgotten, but a job is a job, and I needed the extra money. It was a Thursday night. I arrived at the warehouse at 11 p.m. to pick up the package. It was small, wrapped in plain brown paper with no labels, just the address written in neat handwriting. Something about it felt odd, but I shrugged it off. I put the package in the back of my van and started the drive. The streets grew quieter as I left the busy parts of the city. Streetlights became fewer, and soon I was driving through darkness with only my headlights guiding the way. I checked the GPS and saw that I was getting closer to the destination. It was a house on the edge of town, near an old industrial area. When I reached the address, I stopped the van in front of a large abandoned-looking building. My heart skipped a beat. The building wasn't a house. It was more like an old factory. The windows were broken, and the walls were covered in graffiti. The place looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I double-checked the address, and it matched. This was the place. When I got out of the van, package in hand, and approached the front door. There was no bell, just a rusty metal door with a small slot near the top. I knocked. The sound echoed through the empty street. I waited, but no one answered. I knocked again, this time louder. Suddenly, the slot on the door slid open, and a pair of eyes stared out at me. I jumped back, startled. "Who is it?" a raspy voice asked from behind the door. Delivery. "I have a package for this address," I stammered. There was a long pause. The eyes stared at me without blinking. Finally, the slot closed, and I heard the sound of locks clicking. The door creaked open, just enough for me to slide the package through. "Leave it there," the voice said. I placed the package on the ground and took a step back. The door shut immediately, and the locks clicked again. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. The street was silent, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. As I turned to leave, I heard something, a faint sound, like whispering, coming from inside the building. I stopped and listened closely. The whispers grew louder, but I couldn't make out the words. It sounded like multiple voices speaking at once, overlapping and echoing off the walls. Curiosity got the better of me, and I took a step closer to the door. I leaned in, pressing my ear against the cold metal. The whispers were clearer now, but still unintelligible. Then, all at once, they stopped. Silence filled the air. I stepped back, feeling uneasy. Just as I was about to walk away, I heard a loud bang from inside the building. It sounded like something heavy falling to the ground. My heart raced. I glanced around, hoping to see anyone. I quickly walked back to my van, got inside, and locked the doors. I started the engine and sped off, not looking back. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, something from inside. When I finally got home, I tried to forget about the delivery. I told myself it was just a weird experience, nothing more. But that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the whispers, the bang, and those unblinking eyes. A few days later, I was at the warehouse again, picking up more packages. Out of curiosity, I asked my supervisor about the delivery. I wanted to know what was in that package or who had sent it. He looked at me with a confused expression. "What delivery?" he asked. "The one to the old factory on the edge of town," I explained. He checked the system, but there was no record of any delivery to that address. No package, no sender, nothing. It was like it never happened. I quit my job a week later. My name is Tom, and I drive a delivery van for a living. Most of the time, it's just routine work, dropping off packages, collecting signatures, and moving on to the next stop. I've seen all kinds of places and met all sorts of people, but nothing prepared me for the night I made a delivery to Crestview. Crestview isn't a place people talk about much. It's a small town on the outskirts, almost forgotten by the world. The roads that lead there are narrow, winding through thick forests and empty fields. I had never been there before, but that night, the GPS sent me straight to it. It was raining hard when I left the warehouse, the kind of rain that makes it difficult to see anything beyond your windshield. The package I was delivering was an odd one, heavy but not large, and it rattled slightly when I moved it. There was no name, only an address scrawled in black ink on the label: Crestview, Old Mill Road, number 13. I followed the GPS for about an hour before the streets became more isolated. The houses were farther apart, the lights dimmer. Eventually, I found myself on a narrow dirt road, surrounded by trees. The rain kept pounding on the roof of the van, and every now and then, a flash of lightning would light up the sky, giving me a brief glimpse of the overgrown woods. Finally, I saw a sign at the side of the road, half covered in moss. It read, "Crestview, welcome." I drove on, my headlights cutting through the darkness. The town wasn't much, a few old houses, a gas station that looked like it hadn't been used in years, and a small church with a broken steeple. Old Mill Road was at the far end of town. The houses there were spaced out, hidden behind tall trees and thick bushes. I found number 13 easily enough, a crumbling two-story house with boarded-up windows and a sagging porch. It looked abandoned. I pulled up in front of the house and turned off the engine. For a moment I just sat there, listening to the sound of the rain. Something about the place felt off, but I had a job to do. I grabbed the package from the back of the van and stepped out into the rain. As I walked toward the front door, the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. I glanced around. The whole street was dark, no lights, no sounds, just the rain and the wind. Just as I was about to leave the package on the porch, the door creaked open. A woman stood there, her face hidden in the shadows. She didn't say anything, just looked at me. Delivery for this address," I said, holding up the package. She stepped back, opening the door wider. I hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The house was cold and smelled of damp wood. The hallway was narrow, with peeling wallpaper and dusty floors. The woman led me to a small room at the back of the house. "You can leave it here," she said, her voice soft and distant. I placed the package on a table in the center of the room. As I did, I noticed something strange. There were no pictures on the walls, no furniture, nothing to indicate that anyone actually lived here. The house felt empty, lifeless. Do you need me to sign anything?" the woman asked, her voice startling me. "No, it's fine," I replied quickly. "I just wanted to get out of there." As I turned to leave, I heard a noise from upstairs. It was faint, like footsteps. I stopped and listened. The woman didn't seem to notice, or if she did, she didn't react. Is there someone else here?" I asked, trying to sound casual. The woman looked at me with a blank expression. "Just my husband," she said. "He's resting." I nodded, but something didn't feel right. The footsteps continued, slow and steady, pacing back and forth. I hurried back to the front door, my heart racing. Just as I reached for the handle, I heard the woman speak again. "Thank you," she said, "for bringing him home." I froze. Bringing who home? I turned around, but the woman was gone. The hallway was empty. The door to the room where I had left the package was closed. I didn't wait to find out more. I yanked the door open and ran to my van. As I sped away from the house, the rain seemed to grow heavier, blurring my vision. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing on the porch, but there was nothing. Just the dark, empty road behind me. When I got back to the warehouse, I tried to shake off the strange feeling, telling myself it was just another weird delivery. But something nagged at me. I couldn't stop thinking about the woman's words, bringing him home. The next day, curiosity got the better of me. I did a quick search for Crestview, for Old Mill Road, number 13. What I found sent chills down my spine. Years ago, the house had belonged to a couple. The husband had died in a tragic accident at the old mill. After his death, the wife had lived alone, refusing to leave the house. She became reclusive, and eventually she too passed away. The house had been abandoned ever since. No one was supposed to live there. I never went back to Crestview. I work as a delivery driver for a small company. Most of the time, the job is pretty straightforward. Pick up packages, drop them off, and move on to the next one. But every once in a while, something weird happens. Like the night I delivered a package to an address that wasn't supposed to exist. It was a Friday night, and I was finishing up my last few deliveries. The streets were quiet, and the sky was dark, with only a sliver of the moon peeking through the clouds. I was looking forward to going home, but then I got a call from my dispatcher. "There's one more delivery," he said. "It's a bit out of the way, but the client paid extra for late-night service. The address is 42 Willow Lane." Willow Lane wasn't familiar to me, but I figured it must be in one of the older parts of town. I typed the address into the GPS, and sure enough, it popped up. I accepted the job and headed in that direction. As I drove, the streets became less familiar. The houses grew farther apart, and the trees on either side of the road thickened into a dense forest. The streetlights were fewer and dimmer, casting long shadows that seemed to move with the wind. Eventually, I found myself on a narrow road with no streetlights at all. The only light came from my headlights as they cut through the darkness. The GPS told me I was getting close, but there was something strange. The numbers on the houses didn't make sense. I passed house number 38, then number 40, but there was no number 42. I slowed down, double-checking the GPS. It insisted I was at the right place. I pulled over to the side of the road, staring at the spot where 42 Willow Lane was supposed to be. But all I saw was a small, overgrown path leading into the woods. I got out of the van, package in hand, and walked toward the path. The air was cold and heavy, and the silence of the forest pressed in around me. The path was narrow, barely wide enough for one person, and it twisted deeper into the woods. I hesitated for a moment but decided to follow it. After a few minutes of walking, I saw it, a small old house tucked away in the trees. It looked like it had been there for decades, untouched by time. The windows were dark and the paint was peeling off the walls. The porch sagged under the weight of age and the door was slightly ajar. I approached the house cautiously, feeling a sense of unease growing with every step. I knocked on the door, and it creaked open a little more, but there was no answer. I knocked again, louder this time, but still nothing. The only sound was the rustling of leaves in the wind. "Hello?" I called out. "Delivery?" No response. I glanced down at the package. There was no name on it, just the address. I figured I would leave it on the porch and get out of there. But as I bent down to place the package, I heard something, a faint sound coming from inside the house. It was like a low whisper, just on the edge of hearing. I froze, listening. The whisper grew louder, but I couldn't make out the words. It sounded like multiple voices, all speaking at once, overlapping in a confusing chorus. My heart began to race. I stood up quickly, ready to leave, but then I heard footsteps, slow, shuffling footsteps coming from inside the house. They were moving toward the door. I backed away, my eyes fixed on the dark interior. The footsteps stopped just on the other side of the door, but no one came out. My breath caught in my throat. Something wasn't right. Every instinct was telling me to run, but I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, staring into the darkness beyond the door. Then, without warning, the door swung open wide, revealing nothing but an empty hallway. The whispering grew louder, more urgent, as if the voices were trying to tell me something. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I dropped the package on the porch and bolted back down the path, not looking back. I could feel the cold air pressing against my back, as if something was following me, but I didn't stop. I reached the van, jumped inside, and slammed the door shut. I floored the gas pedal and sped away, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't stop driving until I was back on the main road, the safety of streetlights shining down on me. When I got home that night, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I tried to forget about the delivery, but it lingered in the back of my mind. The next day, I went to the office and told my boss about the strange experience. He frowned and pulled up the delivery records. "There's no record of a delivery to Willow Lane," he said. "Are you sure you got the address right?" I checked my phone, but the address was gone from my history. There was no trace of it, like it had never existed. To this day, I don't know what happened at 42 Willow Lane, but every time I drive through that part of town, I can't help but glance down that dark, narrow road, wondering if the house is still there, or if it was ever there at all.